the millions, and we will be. Because it starts right here.
Guilty.
Welcome to Naptown People's Radio. I'm your host, Dani Abdullah, here with my comrade and co-host,
Derek Ford.
We're here to guide you through the pressing issues facing Indianapolis from the perspective of our people, not our oppressors. And as organizers involved in these issues, we're not just talking about the news, we're making it happen. So let's find out what's happening in our city in the Naptown Breakdown. What do you got for us this week, Derek?
On September 22nd, as we reported last week, Google was forced to withdraw its application for a $1 billion data center after months of protesting from the people. This represents not only a major victory for the people, but also a major defeat for Mayor Joe Hogsett's new economic development organization. So that organization, the Indianapolis Economic Development Inc, is a nonprofit established by the administration this year. His top aide described its primary goals as job creation and retention. Some residents, though, are rightfully concerned that the Hogsett administration has been placing the interests of Google over their own. Brittany York, a member of Protect Franklin Township, the group that organized the grassroots opposition to the data center, told Mirror Indy recently that the Hogsett administration's recommendation to provide millions in tax abatements and financial incentives to a multi-trillion-dollar company shows that the organization clearly isn't listening to the community. Quote, if their whole point is development, York said, why don't they go out and get something that's going to benefit us? Why does it have to be an industrial park or a data center? There are other options out there that are not even in the discussion, end quote. So really, it couldn't be clearer whose interests our local Democratic Party and the Democratic Party and the major parties represent. I mean, here you have a top-down imposed organization set up by Hogsett that is actively lobbying on behalf of Google, our constituents, interfering in the democratic process because that's who they serve. They don't serve us, you know. But speaking of that, you know, when I was going through the latest news developments from our local media, what I was most struck by was what wasn't there. There was not a single article, not one single article that mentioned the tremendous loss that we suffered, the people suffered worldwide September 25th. And that is the passing of Black internationalist revolutionary Assata Shakur, now among the ancestors. And so that tells you really that the news is not objective. It is not impartial, right? Because how could you not cover this major story that millions of people all over the world, I mean, it's in the major headlines, you know, throughout the People's Republic of China, throughout Latin America, throughout Africa, throughout all the continents, right? Except North America. And so that tells you that, you know, they serve particular interest, and that's why we have the Naptown People's Radio, because we serve the people's interests, and we are objective, and we are not impartial, right? Because we represent the people and advance our goals. So we're going to get into Assata more after a short break.
Hey, this is Emily, and I'm a teacher and volunteer with the Indianapolis Liberation Center, working on the struggle against data centers and energy monopolies. The Liberation Center store is a one-stop shop for organizers, lifelong learners, and activists in today's struggles. We have t-shirts, professionally designed posters, as well as buttons, stickers, and a host of literature, including books, pamphlets, and more. This month, honor the legacy of Assata Shakur by reading Assata's autobiography or the texts of her comrades in the Black struggle by proudly wearing her name on a button or displaying her in one of our many originally designed and professionally packaged 11x17 posters. Also, check out our range of comprehensive and introductory texts on gender and sexuality. Red Emma Speaks is a collection of a Russian anarchist and revolutionary's thoughts on subjects like sex, marriage, war, and communism. An Introduction to Women's Studies, Gender in a Transnational World, looks at women in diverse locations around the world and encourages learners to think about gender and sexuality beyond the U.S. Show your solidarity with our sisters and brothers across the globe fighting the same forces that we are. Our wide selection of Artists Against Apartheid prints are now going for 3 prints for $30. Check out a full catalog at indieliberationcenter.org/store.
All right, and we are back with Naptown People's Radio. We are going to have a special episode today because just like Derek said, nobody is covering Assata's passing. So we are going to be talking about the life and legacy of revolutionary and now ancestor Assata Shakur. So let's get into it. Derek and I both have, I think all revolutionaries, hopefully, have, an interesting relationship with Assata Shakur. I, as a Black / New African revolutionary, as a mother, Assata was one of the first people that I learned about when it came to socialism. Unlike a lot of people who, at least maybe in this country, who get into socialism, I got into socialism via Black revolutionaries, not through Marx, although that's who they were studying, was Marx and Lenin. But I was studying, Richard Wright. I was studying Fred Hampton. I was studying Assata Shakur. And so, that is how I found myself at 14 calling myself a socialist. Even though I didn't fully understand what that meant at the time, but I knew that people in Africa, as Assata goes into in her autobiography, there's not a single liberation movement in Africa that was not fighting, and that is not fighting really right now for socialism. Honestly, in the entire world, right? Liberation is not fought. We can't find liberation through fighting for capitalism. We find it through fighting for socialism. And Assata taught me that, So I think so often we hear, oh, Assata taught me. And I'm like, what did Assata teach you? And so that's really what we're going to be getting into right now. It's what did Assata teach us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate you opening up with our relationship to this. I mean, in particular, her autobiography, right? Which is, I'm just looking at mine right now. Back in the day when I bought mine, it was $9.95. Just
a reminder that Derek is old.
Yes, because if I wasn't going to do it, Dani was. But regardless, I think that it is a book that is so compelling in so many ways, and it's such an excellent entry point into revolutionary politics for anybody, really. Mm-hmm. Just because of the, her ability as a writer, her story, the facts, the case, and what she, what they put her through. And of course, I'm not a Black mother, and I was drawn to this book and, moved by it. But it was really in 2010 when I was in Syracuse, New York, and a woman, I believe she was 19 years old at the time, named Shanice Patterson, died at the local jail, was murdered really at the local jail. She was suffering from an ectopic pregnancy and complaining, of all the pain, and the guards were kind of just mocking her, and she bled out. And so we got in touch with the Baptist church that her family was a part of and got close to the family. And we held a community forum. And right before that forum, the police shot and killed Raul Pinat Jr., a Latino man. And so we were able to unite the Black and the Latino and Puerto Rican communities in Syracuse for what was the largest march relative to Syracuse. We had about 100,000 people or something. I don't know. But we had, several 100,000 people out there. And just in here, as I was talking about, forced to give birth, shackled and chained. And just so that was when the idea, like I felt it, because I was building a community with people who lost their loved one, to that. So yeah, that's how, like, that's what the first thing I think about when I think about this book is R.I.P. Shanice Patterson, rest in power, and to all the family, I still think about you all the time, including Raul Pianett Jr., and his wife, but the police didn't even have the dignity to call his wife, to let her know that, there weren't going to be charges pressed. Like, I called her up and I was like, hey, I'm so sorry about the news. She was like, what news? I was like, they're not pressing charges against a cop that killed your husband.
I mean, and isn't that like so on par for the police, right? To not, to not get that information out. I can't identify my client, but I have a client who we've actually worked with her family before in the coalition that we've done. And she didn't find out that the cops murdered her father until, like, she saw it on the news. So that is on brand for, unfortunately for the cops. And for, just like, honestly, like capitalism in general, right? Because it's not about the people, and the people have to show up for one another all the time, right? Like, you calling and letting her know, like, well, you weren't even trying to call and let her know. You were calling to be like, my condolences, and then you ended up having to, like, give that news to her, which is messed up. Yeah.
Goes to showing how much they value our lives,
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so earlier you posed this question, and we hear it all the time, or not, in the movement, right? Assata taught me, Assata taught we, so, but yeah, the specifics, because Assata didn't teach, multiculturalism or diversity and inclusion and equity. She taught a specific ideology, right? So I don't know, what does Assata teach we to get this going? Yeah,
as a new African person, as a Black person, of course, I always have to, I've said this before, I always have to hype up my ancestors, but, like, when we think about oppressed people and the narrative around oppressed people, especially in, particularly in this country, this kind of, mentality that comes with being of African descent, especially of, like, we kind of just gotta, like, you gotta make it. You gotta climb the ladder. You gotta, like, keep going until, like, at least one of us makes it out of here, and that's, like, first off, that's just so draining. But this ladder, and they kind of get into this in, like, she gets into this in her autobiography, but, right, this ladder is, like, somebody has to be at the top and somebody has to be at the bottom when we talk about a ladder, right? And unfortunately, Black people, poor people, are typically at the bottom of that ladder. And as long as there's a system that we're talking about climbing the ladder, or all of these analogies that we kind of have for, like, the system, right? Climbing the ladder, or, like, these glass ceilings, or all these analogies that we have of climbing out, Black people are always on the bottom. And, it was really, like, through her studying and learning about, internationalism, like, politics, like, the people's movement across the world, right? That she was like, okay, we are not going to gain liberation through appealing to the oppressor, right? The oppressors are never going to give us the tools to dismantle them. Assata didn't necessarily say that, but like, the oppressor is never going to give us the tools to overthrow them, and this this ideal, because I'm sure that it was somewhat similar back then. Like Assata goes into like talking about like socialism is not just for white men, which is, I definitely remember joining the party and being like, why am I studying Marx? Why am I studying this dead white man? What does this old white man have to do with my life? And not fully understanding, this is why we have candidacy classes, but not fully understanding how the Russian Revolution, for example, right, has to do with, the revolution in Cuba has to do with Black liberation. I had no idea that Marx was out here trying to help enslaved Africans, and it wasn't until like studying, right? And Assata like really gets into and teaches us like we are all connected. There is no difference when it comes to like African revolutionary goals and African liberation movements and Black liberation movements, New African liberation, and what is happening in Palestine, what is happening in Cuba, what is happening in Russia, right? There is no difference. Like, socialism is not like this evil thing that's used to like control us and to colonize us. That's capitalism, but you wouldn't think that looking at mainstream media. Mainstream media makes it look like socialism. They want to make you wear dreary clothes and take away your like imagination. I'm like, no, that's capitalism. Actually, yeah.
They want to make you poor. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. How can I get any poorer?
I can't, right? Like, I literally cannot. But like, people are like homeless right now. People are starving right now. People are being shot by cops right now, and nothing is being done. That's capitalism, right? And then you go to Cuba, like Assata did, and she was able to live freely. When I found out that she joined the Ancestors, I was like sobbing because I'm a crybaby. But like also, this is since becoming a revolutionary. I'm going to try so hard not to cry on the podcast today. But like since becoming a revolutionary and like not just calling myself a socialist, but like having a better idea of like what does that mean to be a socialist, Assata is the first revolutionary since I've like made that transition that has passed away for me. And that like hit so hard when I found that out. And my husband, shout out to my comrade and my husband, he was like, he was like, oh, she lived a long life. And I was like, 78's not long. And like, she lived longer in Cuba than she would have lived if she was here.
Yeah.
And so like, that's a really, that helps me. Of like, okay,
Yeah. No, and I mean, I think that the way that she came to, first, I think, Assata was such an extraordinary figure for many reasons. I mean, one is that it's really, just because of the, the patriarchal frame through which we're taught history that seeps into social movements too. Oftentimes like women revolutionaries are, even considered because they're attached to male revolutionaries, right? Like Shirley Graham Du Bois, like wasn't the one who radicalized W.E.B. Du Bois, actually. Coretta Scott King wasn't the one who like, Malcolm X read, or Martin Luther King Jr. read Karl Marx to impress his girlfriend, right? But Assata, you can't tie her to any man,
Absolutely.
Right? And she was not only like an organizer, careful thinker, but also like a military strategist and a realistic one. And her journey, from just everyday reality, like growing up, not like from the, trench, like the gutter, right? Not from, the pure middle class, right? But just a regular working class family going to community college, She's encountering in the 60s, right, all these communist groups. And, she writes in her autobiography about I was so brainwashed. I thought that all communists were the same, that there were Marxists, Leninists, Maoists, Trotskyists, but most of the so-called communists I met weren't in any party at all, right? But they followed the philosophy of communism. She was surprised to learn that there were different types of capitalist countries and communist countries. So, she said, she talks about, although they are all socialists, right? East Germany, Bulgaria, Cuba, and North Korea are as different as night and day. All of them have different histories, different cultures, and different ways of applying the socialist theory, although they have the same economic and similar political systems, right? So that goes back to why study this dead white man? Well, why ideas have nothing to do, they're not permanently tied to the soil from which the person and the movements that generated them arose. I don't know, wherever gravity was discovered, it's not as if we can't use that theory because it was developed by a racist dude probably or something. I don't know. You know what I mean? That just doesn't make any sense. And I think if you explain it to people, they will be with us. But, she was still skeptical, right? It was some kind of white man's concoction until I read the works by African revolutionaries and studied the African liberation movements. Revolutionaries in Africa understood that the question of African liberation was not just a question of race, that even if they managed to get rid of the white colonialists, if they didn't rid themselves of the capitalist economic structure, the white colonialists would simply be replaced by black neo-colonialists.
Right. It goes to one of my favorite quotes. This is not revolutionary and all, but I guess it kind of is. Get the kinks out of your mind, not your hair. Right. That's exactly what she's talking about. Right. We cannot replace capitalism with black capitalism. That is actually not helpful at all. Despite what Beyonce and Jay-Z will tell you. So it's not helpful at all. I think one of the things that you can see when you're reading it also is she was such a light and positive person, right? If you think about, I can't imagine. I'm sure there are some listeners who maybe can, but I can't imagine first off, putting my hands up and being shot in the stomach, and then still going to prison for life plus 33 years. But y'all shot me in the stomach. She didn't shoot anyone. She didn't kill anybody, right? And yet, as so many people who are of African descent can, testify to, right? As Assata Shakur, as Vernon T. Bateman, right? You can go to prison and not have killed anyone, have not, in Vernon's case, not have done anything, literally done nothing. And she was still a revolutionary. She was still positive. She still believed in the people. She was still able to evoke this revolutionary spirit in people across the world who she never met. Millions of people are mourning the loss of Assata Shakur, despite what this country, despite what the police have tried to make her out to be, which is a monster, a murderer. And she did nothing except show up for the people, show out for the people every time. And that is she dared to serve her community, to study and to teach about liberation struggles, to protest imperialist war, to stand against police brutality, to imagine and contribute toward building a world beyond exploitation. And that's what made her dangerous. That's what made her a target. And And I strive to be like Assata. You know, I want to be just like Assata. Maybe not just like her because I want to be me. But, you know, there's so much in Assata that, like, I want to embody, you know, especially, you know, as a mother, as a Black woman, as a revolutionary. Like, I'm not trying to get shot in my stomach, obviously, but, you know, she was amazing.
Yeah. She was amazing because, I mean, you think about not only, you know, were her comrades able to, you know, liberate her from prison. And after spending time underground, you know, she sought asylum in Cuba, which granted it to her. And, you know, put her up with a place to stay and where she remained the rest of her life. And when it came out that Assata had received asylum in Cuba, you know, the governor of New Jersey, which is, you know, the New Jersey Turnpike is where the incident went down, you know, put out like a $50,000 bounty on her head, right? And I remember, you know, every like year or so, these stories would come up in left news media outlets like, oh, Cuba's thinking about giving up Assata. And I remember like every single time just like being like, squash that. That's BS. They will never do that. You know, Cuba has still not cashed a single check that the U.S. has sent them for their occupation of Guantanamo Bay. And Cuba needs money. Let me tell you that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But they stay true to that, you know. And when she went, I mean, I think, you know, for our listeners who don't know also like we don't need to tell the entire story, but there's a continuity and an overlap, you know, not only between the Black Panther Party, but also the Weather Underground and the Black Liberation Army, of which Assata was a part. So, you know, the Weather Underground was primarily a white working class organization of students. They were part of SDS. At their 1969 convention, they became the dominant faction. And at the time, this is the era of global revolution, right? And so they want to be part of that. And so a group of people, including my friend Bill Ayers, Mark, and then some Bernadine Dorn and others won. And as David Gilbert recalls, who was also a BLA member and a Weather Underground member, you know, when they went out, they were going to go underground. People didn't think they'd last 6 months, but they lasted, you know, 6 years engaging in a series of bombings, attacks, and prison breaks where no one was injured, right? So they went underground in February of 1970, and they threw 3 Molotov cocktails at the house of the judge who was persecuting 21 members of the Black Panther Party on bogus charges. And after the Panthers, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were killed by the CIA, Weather Underground declared war on the U.S. government. So throughout that decade, they bombed the New York City Police Department, the Pentagon to commemorate Ho Chi Minh's birthday, the U.S. Capitol building after the invasion of Laos, the Office of California Prisons in Sacramento for the assassination of George Jackson, the National Guard headquarters after the killings at Kent State and Jackson State, the federal offices of health, education, and welfare, always calling ahead to make sure that nobody was there so that there were no casualties. But, you know, the mass movement died. They became isolated. So some, you know, like David Gilbert were, you know, he ended up remaining within the BLA and was eventually caught up in a Brinks armed truck robbery. And he was sentenced to, I think, 75 years in prison. And he was finally released on parole in, I think, 2021. And my friend Bill Ayers and his partner Bernadine Dorn raised his son while he was in prison. That's Chesa Boudin. So, you know, you can see the other thing about Assata is like everywhere she go, family and community is important to her. She's a military strategist, but she's also a community builder, you know. But, you know, by this time, like the international political situation was changing. We're going from the era of global revolution to the era of global counter-revolution. Yeah. And so, you know, after remaining underground, you know, David Gilbert was, you know, caught in this robbery, you know, and many were. And that was really part of the domestic aspect of the U.S. counteroffensive against the revolutionary tide sweeping the world. Because in 1979, it was in 1979 that Gilbert went back underground, because that was when Zimbabwe was liberated, and that's when Assata escaped from prison. And so he was like, all right, there's a new wave coming, right? But it was really the end of that era. And so the fact that, Assata's autobiography, reading it, there's not a lot of men that are mentioned. There's not a lot of playing up on the guns and the violence, right? But so it's a very sensitive and well thought out and evidence of a carefully thinking human being, right? Who is dedicated to the struggle from day one until the last day. In a later interview that she gave, because if you read the appendix to Assata, the autobiography, she's talking about racism in Cuba, right? And now they didn't really have a conception of it. And they were like, what are you talking about, right? Like, what do you mean? And later on, in a later interview, right, like after decades had gone by, she's quite frank, right? She's like, there's, with the overthrow of the socialist camp in the Soviet Union, like Cuba was isolated. They were forced to go, open up to tourism, right? And like there can't be affirmative action until everybody can, eat and have housing and clothing. And and they had to open it up to tourism, which brings those things. And the Cuban government is doing the best they can to control it, right? So racial antagonisms remain, but they also remain managed. And she says, like, quote, I believe it would be historically impossible for this situation that I'm looking at now not to have occurred, right? And then she goes on to say, like, look, why are we talking about this? Why don't we talk about cultural nationalism? Over in the U.S., everybody's like, oh, I'm part Egyptian, I'm part this and that, right? And she says, like, I appreciate people discovering the background and who they are, but like that's not politics. The cops are going to ask you that before they shoot you, right? That's not what draws the line about politics. And so therefore we need to rethink our political activity, and I think she's asking us to rethink hers as well. Because she's not a model to copy. Marxism isn't a dogma, right? She doesn't want her life to be a model to copy, right? The last thing she would want to be seen as like, us form a doctrine around her called Assataism, right?
That's fair. Yeah, no, absolutely. Although that reminds me of Marx, his tombstone is like this big bust of his head. And I'm like, the first time I saw it, I was like, he probably would have hated this.
Definitely.
This is absolutely horrible. And yeah, I mean, to go to like, what I'm saying, what I was saying before of like wanting to be just like her, right? I'm a Marxist-Leninist, right? And like that shouldn't be confused with, I appreciate that. That shouldn't be confused with like, yes, I'm going to do everything that Assata did, right? That is not what anybody should take away from Assata taught me, Assata taught we, right? Is not like, this is how Assata did it, so this is how I should do it. It should be like, look at how she was dedicated to the people. Look how she was dedicated to the movement. And look how she was like constantly, right? Like even decades later, like constantly learning. And like her frame of mind is not going to be the same as in Cuba as it is in the U.S., right? There are different circumstances happening. She's gone through life differently, whatever. But like, that doesn't, we can learn from what she has done and like take it and apply it to what is happening in your city, what is happening in your neighborhood, what is happening to you and your family, and how can, this is not a WWAD thing. What would Assata do? But like something to look to and be like, it helps me keep my revolutionary optimism to think about Assata and like, okay, damn, like things are rough out here, and like how can I keep going? How can I motivate myself and motivate my comrades to like keep going How can we look at this differently? And how can we make sure that we're taking everyone who wants to come with us also?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not, as you said before, like, what would Assata do? It's because what we should draw is like, what did Assata teach us to help us get free? Because ultimately that was her goal, and that was not just her goal, but her organization's goals, and that's our goal. That's our organization's goals. The organizations that are part of the Liberation Center, that's our goal. How do we get free? That's the ultimate objective, and then we go back from there. And Assata's life, her thinking, her works, her actions are filled with lessons that can help us get free.
Yeah.
For real. Finally. Forever.
Forever. That's the goal. Okay. All right. We will be right back.
What happened is that we responded. Where there is repression, there will be resistance.
And we're back here on Naptown People's Radio. We hope you enjoyed the discussion of Assata Shakur and encourage you all to continue to look into and study her life, her work, her legacy to see what lessons we can learn as we continue to struggle to get free with our people, including our Circle City shout out of the week. Dani, who's that go to?
All right, so today's Circle City shout out goes to Umid Hope. Umid Hope is a coalition of marginalized communities committed to dismantling systems of oppression and fostering a world grounded in justice, collective care, and liberation. They are a Sikh-led organization, so Sikh as in SIKH, but they serve all sects of marginalized communities. So founded in 2022, they initially operated as a nonprofit organization, but in 2024 transformed into a mutual aid group to more effectively address the interconnected issues affecting our communities. Their mission is rooted in the belief that true change comes from collective action and solidarity among those most impacted by systemic injustices. Their work focuses on addressing these interconnected issues such as gender-based violence, mental health disparities, anti-war efforts, and other forms of systemic oppression through community-driven initiatives, mutual aid, and collaboration with local nonprofits, volunteers, and professionals from diverse fields. In the past, the Indie Liberation Center has been able to collaborate with them as well. So they recognize that these various forms of repression do not live in a silo. Umid Hope recognizes that the solutions to systemic oppression lie within the communities most affected by it, which is why they strive to center the voices and experiences of marginalized individuals, develop strategies and initiatives that are truly responsive to their needs. This approach not only addresses immediate concerns, but also promotes long-term change by challenging the root causes of systemic injustice. Their website, which is umidhope.org, which we can put that in the show notes so everyone can check that out, states our commitment to mutual aid reflects our dedication to justice, equity, and liberation for all. Together, we strive to build a community where every individual is empowered to lead, heal, and thrive, working in solidarity to dismantle the systems that oppress us all. So it's about the people. It's about the power of the people and what we can do when we are united. And just like Assata, Umid Hope is out here serving their community, our community, committed to liberation and imagining and contributing toward building a world beyond exploitation. So shout out to Umid Hope.
Yeah, shout out to Umid Hope. So speaking of Black women that the state brutalizes and terrorizes and then charges for crimes that they themselves have committed, tomorrow, Wednesday, October 1st, at 8:30 a.m., show up to the so-called Justice Campus to support Jada Traynor in her fight against the prosecution of Ryan Mears. So Jada Traynor was brutalized by cops at the hospital last year, and her trial finally starts this Wednesday. Instead of charging the abusive, racist police who brutally beat Jada, a Black mother, an Air Force veteran who was seeking urgent medical attention and was ignored and then discharged, Ryan Mears continues moving forward with his trial against Jada. The cops who attacked her have no case, no evidence except for the word, which is contradictory. One of them also has retired and left the county, which shows you something. But they're still moving forward. This apparently is a big priority for Ryan Mears to go after this black mother. So we're going to be there. It's 8:30 a.m., Marion County Supreme Court 27, located at the Community Justice Campus. Again, that's Wednesday, October 1st at 8:30 a.m. Now, there's going to be something else happening that day relative to Kofi Ajabu, who has officially been granted his clemency hearing. So as a young man on a gap year between sophomore and junior years of college, Kofi found himself at the scene of a horrific tragedy that left 3 young people murdered. He was offered a plea deal that would have resulted in 20 years served, but refused to admit to murders he did not commit and elected to go to trial instead. If you want to learn more, Dani and our other comrade Bridget did a great interview with his mother, younger sister, and Orvin Mabel, the foreman on Kofi's jury. Now, that is important because the foreman of the jury that convicted Kofi made a call for clemency, stating he never believed Kofi killed anyone. The parole board has finally responded. This is a rare and extraordinary chance for mercy and justice, and the parole board needs to hear from as many as supporters as possible right now. All letters of support should be submitted by the end of the day, Wednesday, October 1st, to be included in the official packet, and you can email them to clemencyforkofi@gmail.com. And then finally, our partner organization, Arte Mexicano in Indiana, and Big Car Collaborative are putting on the last of their Levitt Vibe Indianapolis Music Series this Sunday, October 12th, between 12 and 3 p.m. at the Tube Factory campus. So it's an amazing opportunity. They happen on a monthly basis. There'll be folk music, traditional Venezuelan music, traditional Indonesian music. There'll be, food, Colombian flatbreads. Galleries will be open, and also you can participate in creating a mural that will be hung on the Safeway on Raymond Street. So that's it for this episode of Naptown People's Radio. If you found today's episode useful, pass it on, leave a comment, and listen for our next one to drop. Support us at support.pslindianapolis.org and by shopping at the Liberation Center store. If you have a suggestion for the show, you can email us at producer@naptownpeoplesradio.com. The road ahead is long, but we walk it together. Study with your comrades, build with your community, and always remember, theory without action is paralysis, but action without theory is chaos. Once again, I'm your host, Derek Ford, here with my comrade and co-host,
Dani Abdullah.
Stay dangerous, stay disciplined, and stay in the struggle.
We trying to create a movement. We got a chance to do something in Indiana that brothers like myself been talking about for the last 40 years. When I first became political and we was organized behind the walls in the 80s and 90s, some of the stuff that we doing now with the different programs and the different institutions that we have and things like the Indy Center is things that we used to talk about and dream about doing. And now we doing them. See what I'm saying? We doing it. And we got to keep that momentum going, and it's also generational. So as the next generation come up, you know what I'm saying, it's on y'all to take it to the next level and take it to the next stage.
Salute, Assata Shakur.